Hello and welcome to the part one of the processing in asteroids tutorial. First, we are going to be talking about processing, and then we're going to get into some programming. So first, if you want to head over to processing.org, this is where you can download processing if you have not already. The download button, select your platform, get that downloaded and extracted from the zip folder. But what we're going to be talking about today is the reference page. This is the page of all of the pre-made functions and usable items in processing. So for instance, later we're going to be using this triangle one, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But if you ever have anything you think you want to do, this would be the first place to look as far as the tools that you have to accomplish your goals. So if we go, we can open up processing. So in processing, we're going to be mainly focused on 4 different variable types. That is int, float, boolean, and string. Okay, so an int, as you can see, these all highlighted orange right away because they are variables. An int is short for an integer. And those are numbers such as 0, -1, 2, 158. They're all whole numbers. Whereas a float has a decimal place. So these are numbers like 0.5, 2.1, and even 1.0. So even if you have a 0 for your decimal, where this normally would not count, if you can see that better, where this decimal, like you wouldn't usually write this decimal if you were writing 1, but a float always has a decimal. And then you have a boolean, which is a true or a false value, like a light switch. It either has on or off. And then a string, this is a collection of characters. So we talked about Twitter and how we use characters to see how long our tweets can be. This is the same deal, but just using characters. So a string is a collection of characters. Maybe. Spelling, check it, let me know. In which we usually use quotes to set the string. So when you set a string value or set a strings variable, you will use quotes like quote, math is the best, end quote. You can see that a little better if I go down to the next line. So pause it if you want to write this down in your notes. But otherwise, I'm going to delete these and we'll get into setting up a program. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to go to my libraries, my documents, my code folder. This is code for the video. So I'm going to name my file, I'm going to make a new folder, Asteroids, and in that folder, I'm going to name my file Asteroids. Okay. So I have my new program. It's called Asteroids. You can see that on this top tab. So some of the first things we're going to do is we're going to talk about 2 functions, void setup and void draw. Now void setup, this is where all of your code is going to start. Void setup's the first thing that's going to run, and it's only going to run once the entire time that your program is going. Whereas void draw is going to run right after void setup, but it's going to keep running at whatever frames per second you set your program at. So let's do that real quick. We can set our frame rate is a built-in function, and it takes a number of frames that we want to run at. So we're going to say we want to run at 60 frames per second. So with this program, it would run void setup, it would set the frame rate to 60, and then when it gets to the draw, this is a loop that's set up in processing. This draw loop is going to run 60 times per second. So that's where a lot of our game logic is going to go. So other things that we can change, I don't know if you know, this is the run button. We can look at that right now and see what it is just to have a point of reference. It's really small and it's gray. So if we use the size built-in function, we can set the size of the screen with a width and a height, and we'll set it to 700 by 700. Now if we run it, we have a bigger screen, but it's still all gray. So let's change that. You can do that by doing background, and background takes color. So it can take a grayscale color, grayscale with alpha, RGB with alpha, I believe. But right now, since we're making asteroids, we want a black background. So we're going to set that to 0. Now if we run it again, we have a black background. Perfect. Another thing that Java programmers like to do is outside of void setup, we like to set up variables. And this is where commenting can be kind of nice. So if you notice before, I did these double forward slashes. That's to denote a comment. So whenever my program runs, if I have a double slash, I can write comments, and it turns up gray. This is code that the computer won't run. It doesn't run any comments. The comments are just there for the programmers to know what's going on and to pass notes on what certain variables do. So I'm going to set up a comment that denotes the area where I'm going to put my variables, and I'm going to make a few variables, and these are going to start out with floats. So the way we declare a variable is we say the type of the variable, and then we give it a name. So we're going to be making the ship today, so we're going to need a position X for the ship, and we're going to need a float position Y for the ship. We are also going to want a size variable, which is going to be an integer. We're going to start with that. And then, so what happens is, this is setting up our variables and saying what type of variables we have. Then in our setup, we're going to set those to a specific number. So this is where we're going to call that variable position X, same name as up there, and we're going to set this to the width of the screen divided by 2, because we want our ship to be in the middle of the screen, and we're going to set our position Y to be the height divided by 2. The width and the height are built-in functions that coordinate with this size variable, or the size function. So what happens is when you set the size of your screen, these two numbers get stored in a width and a height variable inside of processing. So that's why we can use those to call those back. And if we ever change the screen, this code will still run perfectly fine and put the ship in the middle. And then we're also going to change the size to be 15. Okay, so now I think we are ready to draw the ship. So what I think I'm going to do first is we are going to make a function. So we are going to make a custom function called render. Okay, and so inside of our draw function, we're going to call render. So that render gets called 60 times a second. And inside of render, I'm going to put all of my draw to the screen logic. So all of my different shapes, colors, all of that stuff, just to keep it separated, because later on we're going to have code that needs to be updated. And I like to put that in a different function so that I can keep it straight of like where everything is. So in the render function, we are first going to do, let's do the triangle first. So we'll do triangle, and this is where we can go look at that reference page real quick. So a triangle towards the top. A triangle takes 6 different numbers. And if we look down here at the parameters list, this tells you what all of these need to be. So they need to be floats, and then you're going to have an x and a y coordinate for your first point, x and y for your second, x and y for your third. So the basic idea is that we're setting up the 3 points of a triangle on the screen, and it's going to fill in the triangle. So if we go here, we can show you kind of what the plan is for the triangle. So we are going to assume we have a point right here. I'll call that 0, 0. Okay. What we want to do is we want to make a little bit of an elongated triangle to make it look more like a ship. So what we're going to do is the first point we're going to set up here, and this is going to be at 0, and then this is going to be minus size times 1.5. And remember, this is because it's minus because you have a screen set up where the numbers, the y numbers, get bigger as you go down, and the x numbers get bigger as you go to the right. So first point we're going to have is at 0, negative size times 1.5, and then second point we're going to have is going to be at negative size. So we're going to move over negative size and move down positive size. So it should be somewhere down here. And then the last point is going to be at positive size, positive size. So then we're going to get these 3 points, and it should make a triangle somewhat like that. All right, so going back over to processing. So let's fill in this triangle. So we had, the first point was 0, negative size times 1.5, negative size, 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 size. So if we run this, see if we got anything. So it's not in the middle of the screen, but you do see a little corner right up here in the top corner. So that means it's actually drawing something to the screen, but it is in the top corner. So one way to fix that, and this is why we made the position X and the position Y earlier, is we're going to translate the ship. So translate, another one of these great functions on processing. And one little trick is if you hit Control F on the website, or I think it's Function F on a Mac, you can type in, this is like Control Find. So you can type in what you need. So if we want translate, there it is right there. Translate takes an X and a Y if we're working in 2D, which is a left and right translation, and then a up and a down translation. So for translate, we can do position X and position Y. Let's see how this looks. All right, cool. Now we have our ship, which is in the middle of the screen, but we don't really want it filled in white like that. So let's change it up a little bit. So we don't want it filled in. So let's do no fill on this triangle. We'll see what that looks like. Okay, so it looks like it doesn't have an outside. So we might have to do a border, I think. If we set the stroke to 255, which is white, and then if we set the stroke weight to 2 pixels, let's see how that looks. Perfect. Now we have our ship in the middle of the screen. It's looking good. I think there's just one more thing to talk about. There are 2 functions called push and pop that you're going to want to do whenever you're making objects in processing. What these do is they basically keep all of your changes to like no fill, stroke, stroke weight isolated, and translate isolated to this one object. So all of these changes we're making, we want to be affecting this triangle. So what we need to do is we need to push and pop around all these changes and the triangle so that it doesn't affect any of our future objects that we're going to be drawing to the screen. So if you want, grab me or Mr. Lavin, and we'll come around and check and see your progress and see that you got this. And then we'll mark it down on the gradebook, and then you can move on to the next part.